Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jill Cool and I am the Monitoring Officer to the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. Welcome to the first meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I would like to welcome all those present. Thank you for joining us through this new forum, and just to remind members that the meeting will be broadcast live to the Combined Authority website and will be available for subsequent viewing. During the meeting, we're asking that members and officers please ensure that when you wish to speak, you indicate in the chat box that you would like to do so. When you are invited to speak, please unmute your microphone and turn it off after you have finished speaking. And can everyone please ensure that their phones are switched to silent, please. Appointments to the membership of the committee for this municipal year are a little different. Following consultation with the 6 constituent authorities, the vacancy for a Liberal Democrat nomination from Knowsley Council has not been filled by a Knowsley councillor, but has been filled by a councillor, Dr John Pugh from Sefton. This appointment is for the municipal year of 2020 to 2021 only, and thereafter Knowsley will again have the opportunity to appoint to this position for the following municipal year. We move to our first item of business on the agenda, and that is the appointment of Chair for 2020-2021. Please may I have nominations to the position of Chair for the Overview and Scrutiny for the next municipal year.
Hi, I nominate Councillor Tom Crone.
Thank you, Councillor Corkill. Please may I have that seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Pugh. I hereby confirm that the nomination is to be considered. Is there any votes against or for that nomination before we proceed? In the silence that I appear to be receiving, I will take the acquiescence to be consent. In those circumstances, the motion is passed and Councillor Crone will be the chair for this committee meeting for the next municipal year. I'm wish to tell members of the committee that Councillor Crone is unable to join us on this occasion. He has indicated that he is happy to continue in his position as chair, so we'll take up the seat formally at the next meeting of the committee, which is not due to take place until September. We now move to the next item of business, which is the appointment of Vice Chair. Please may I have nominations for the position of Vice Chair for this committee for the next municipal year. Councillor Pugh, did you wish to speak?
My understanding is member of any party, the Vice Chair, is that correct?
Could you repeat your question, Councillor Pugh? You broke up a wee bit.
My understanding is that any member of any party, Liberal, Labour, Conservative, can be a Vice Chair according to the rules and regulations. Am I right in thinking that?
Councillor Pugh, you may recall that this was considered at the committee in January last year. The legal advice that we had is that the opposition councillor, it should be an opposition councillor that fulfills the position of Vice Chair. So from the 5 councillors that are opposition councillors on this committee, it will be important that one of those 5 becomes a Vice Chair. I understand that you may have a nomination to make.
Okay, I'll nominate Councillor Corkill as Vice Chair then.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pugh. Is that seconded? Do we have Councillor Wainwright on the call?
I can't see him, Jill.
Do we have Councillor Whitley on the call?
Yes.
Councillor Whitley, do you have anything to contribute at this point in the meeting?
I'll second Councillor Corkill.
Thank you, Councillor Whitley. Very much appreciated. I put the motion to the committee that Councillor Corkill is to become the Vice Chair of the committee. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, councillors. Very much appreciated. In the circumstances of the chair of the committee being unable to attend, the vice chair will now assume leadership and control of the meeting as its chair. Councillor Corkill, welcome to the chair.
Thank you very much, Jill. Should I keep my camera and microphone on for the rest of the meeting from now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much for the nomination and for the seconding. The following councillors were not reappointed to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for this municipal year: Andy Bowden, Carl Cashman and Jimmy Jackson. I'd like to place on record our thanks for their contribution to the work of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And can I also extend a warm welcome to the newly appointed councillors who, along with myself, have just been appointed to the membership of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee: Lynn Clark and Derek Long. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Crone, Adrian Jones and Sir Ron Watson.
Thank you, Lisa. So we can move on to declarations of interest. Have any been received?
We haven't received any, Chair.
Great, so we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which are the minutes for the previous meeting of the LCR Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 4th of March 2020. They are included on pages 1 to 14 of this agenda. Are the minutes now agreed and accepted as an accurate record of those meetings?
I will move the minutes be accepted, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Great. I think that
Councillor Corkill, sorry
Yeah.
to interject. It's Trudy here, the Committee Services Manager.
Yeah.
I understand Councillor O'Brien wishes to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see in the chat.
No,
Sorry.
it's okay.
Councillor O'Brien, you can speak now. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that at the moment, maybe we should be registering apologies for absence for Councillor Gorst, but he tells me he's been trying to get into this meeting for an hour, so he doesn't want to be absent. I don't know how that is dealt with under the administration of this meeting. And I'm hoping he will be able to get in, but at the moment he's not in.
We can record his apology.
Well, if he cannot get in, I think it needs to be dealt with in some way. Maybe recording apologies might be appropriate, but I'm not sure.
Councillor O'Brien, Councillor O'Brien, just to let you know, our IT colleagues are contacting Councillor Gorst to try and get him into the meeting, so hopefully that should be rectified shortly.
Hopefully, so maybe it's just apologies for lateness. And I have let him know that you are trying on his behalf.
Councillor O'Brien, if he's not able to join us, it's Jill here, the monitoring officer, and we may well make a special note in the minutes if he's not able to join us through technical difficulties, that we obviously know he was willing and wanting to attend.
Yes, because
So
both of us were very keen that this meeting should be quorate, and we've given up, a special event in our ward to be here today. We're both in the same ward politically.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien. We really appreciate that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Councillor O'Brien. I think we can move on to item number 6 then, and Trudy Bedford will present this report.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, members. This report just sets out some arrangements for the work planning session, which will be taking place next Wednesday, the 29th of July. And further information with regards to that session will be sent to you shortly. Section 5 of the report explains the reasons behind the Overview and Scrutiny Annual Report not being available as yet. You may recall we undertook a task and finish review into the work of the LCR LEP towards the end of the last municipal year. Those recommendations still need to be considered by the LEP board, which will be done in the coming months, and then we will bring to you your annual report in September. And then section 6 of the report just highlights that at the Combined Authority meeting on the 20th of March, 2 questions were submitted by Unlock Democracy with regards to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The first question from them was asking whether public questions could be introduced to the committee in the similar way that they are considered by the Combined Authority. And their second question related to concerns regarding attendance and quorum issues for the committee. The Metro Mayor did respond. His responses are attached to Appendix 2 of the report. And this is something that we consider as part of the work planning session next Wednesday. That's all I have to say on the report. If there are any questions, I'm happy to ask them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Trudy. Are there any questions at this point from any members?
Councillor Corkle, I'm conscious a couple of councillors aren't able to indicate they wish to speak in the chat facility. I've offered my private mobile number to them so that they can indicate to me, or they may do so verbally.
Okay, great. I'll give it a couple of seconds then to see if anyone gets in touch with you.
In the meantime, I think Councillor Pugh has.
Yeah, just on the Unlock Democracy request, it seems strange in the sense of have a public session, a public question session of an Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I don't know if that's common practice, but normally it's the executive bodies that are quizzed by the public. And I just wonder, is it the norm in other Overview and Scrutiny Committees of this nature that there are public questions and answer sessions?
I'm happy to answer that, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Councillor Pugh, as from my research, you're quite correct. The public questions are generally for the executive, but I think there is a recognition and a need that for scrutiny to fulfil its function, it does need some public engagement. That is something that we currently are lacking within our scrutiny function for the Combined Authority, but ways that can be addressed is through the work planning session, whether we engage members of the public through the website, asking them to submit topics for consideration through that process, or obviously you as councillors within your community role, if you're aware of any issues that you're seeing regularly through your constituency that kind of broadly reflect the role and remit of the Combined Authority, that is another way for community issues to come forward.
Great, thanks, Judy. I'm aware that Councillor Wainwright has emailed. He's also having problems getting online. I don't know how many councillors there are currently that aren't able to get in, but it seems like there's a few. I wonder if Jill, you could send your phone number to Councillor Wainwright as well, so he can get in touch if he wants. Okay, so as you can see, sorry,
I've got Councillor Marshall on the phone identifying some technical issues with me, and I've put my telephone number in the chat facility, so all councillors participating in this meeting can see my telephone number. So hopefully they can contact me to let me know there's nobody contacting me other than Councillor Marshall at the moment.
Okay, great. As you can see, hopefully on the screen and on page, let me see, page 15 of the agenda, the recommendations. Can I ask that those recommendations are approved?
Agreed.
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 Great.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Fantastic. As I didn't hear any rejections, I'll take that as approved. Moving on to item 7, which is the appointment of scrutiny members to the Audit and Government Committee for the 2020-2021 year. So Jill, you're going to present a report for us, please.
Sorry, councillors, I'm still liaising with Councillor Marshall, just bear with me.
Yeah.
So, forgive me, we're up to agenda item 7, aren't we?
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, the report seeks nominations for the appointment of scrutiny members to the Audit and Governance Committee. The report details that we require 2 councillors to come from the Labour group and 2 councillors to come from the opposition groups, 1 Lib Democrat and 1 Conservative group member. We ask that those nominations be made today so that we can convene a meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. Please, may I have nominations?
I would like to move on behalf of the Labour Group, Councillor Louise Whitley and Edna Finneran.
Could I nominate myself for the Audit and Governance, please?
Could I second the nominations from the Labour Group, please, Jill?
Thank you, Councillor Whitley. So we've got Councillor Whitley and Councillor Finneran for the Labour Group from Audit and Governance. For the Liberal Democrat nomination, we have Councillor Pugh nominating himself. May I have those seconded?
Yeah, I'll second Dr. John Pugh.
Thank you. For the Conservative group, please may I have a nomination? Councillor Cameron, you've indicated your wish to speak.
Morning. I'm happy to continue on the Audit and Governance Committee if that's acceptable to anybody else.
May we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Cameron.
I'll second that if it's needed, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Pugh. So we have
Thank you, John.
nominations for Councillor Cameron for the Conservative councillor, and we have nominations for Councillor Pugh for the Audit and Governance Committee for the Liberal Democrats, and Councillor Whitley and Councillor Finneran. They're all agreed. Thank you very much, councillors.
Jill, do you need the 4 substitute members now?
Yes, we're just going to move to those councillors.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Corkill. If I may suggest that we also move to the substitute councillors.
I nominate Councillor Corkill as substitute for me.
Is that seconded? Councillor Corkill, is that seconded?
Okay, can I second myself? Yeah, I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor Corkill. May we have the Labour nominations?
I think they're as was, Jill, actually, so that would be Councillor Marshall and Councillor Howard. I'd like to nominate both, please.
Councillors Howard and Marshall nominated. Is that seconded?
I'd like to
I will second that. Thank you.
There's a clamour. Lovely, thank you. And then for the Conservative councillor, I think it was Councillor Watson that was your substitute, was it, Councillor Cameron?
Actually, no, Councillor Watson was on the Audit and Governance Committee and I was the substitute.
Oh, forgive me.
And I'm unable to nominate Councillor Watson at the moment for that, but obviously with the numbers we understand, I'm sure he'll be happy to substitute on that.
Should we
I can't nominate formally.
No, I was going to say perhaps in the absence of him being able to attend and
Sorry, your sound's gone.
Oh, you've muted, Jill.
Oh, lovely. I'll start that sentence again then. You've missed some lovely words of wisdom. I said in the absence of Councillor Watson being able to attend the meeting today and in the absence of confirmation of his acceptance of being a substitute member, would members be content for us to carry forward that nomination for a substitute member to the next committee of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting?
Agree that.
Yeah.
So we have all of the main councillors appointed to the board, but we'll come back for the substitute for the Conservative. Thank you very much, councillors.
Thank you. So we go through an appointment process. So can we approve those appointments as set out on page 23, paragraph 2.1 of the agenda, please?
Agreed.
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 Fantastic. Oh, we have a question. Feel free to ask now. Helen, yeah.
Hi, through you, Chair. I just wanted to thank all of the democratic services and monitoring officers for their time in trying to broker these positions. I know it's not easy. And I noted that some legal advice was sought. I just have a question about whether any expenses were incurred in all of these matters, trying to bring us in line with every other combined authority in the UK, having chair and vice chair from opposition parties. If you could, if you can't answer now, obviously happy to take an answer on email. Just like to know if the legal advice cost any of the people who do pay council tax any money. Thanks.
Does anyone want to come in on that right now, or can we go?
Sorry, Councillor Corkill, I'm afraid I was dealing with another query from a councillor, so I missed the question. I apologise, Councillor Cameron. Would you mind repeating the question to see if I can assist?
Sorry, Jill, I was thanking you and the Democratic Services colleagues for all their time in brokering all of these appointments. It's taken, effort and endless conversations. I just wanted to know where in your notes you indicate that following the receipt of legal advice, I'd just like to know if any cost on that legal advice was incurred by the difficulty in trying to bring this combined authority scrutiny committee into line with all other combined authorities in the country. Thanks.
There was a small cost. It was minimal in the sense that we used a framework partner that we utilise quite frequently and have negotiated rates with them through the North West Legal Consortium. So it would have been a minimal cost. I can't recall what it is off the top of my head. It's something I could follow up with you individually if that would benefit.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Anything by email is fine. Thank you.
Lovely, and apologies for having to make you repeat it.
Okay, great. I certainly second the efforts of the Democratic Services in getting us to this point. So thanks to everyone involved. We do need to formally approve the appointments, though. So if I could get an approval from the group, that would be great.
Agreed.
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 Great, thank you, everyone. So item 8, Mark Bowersfield, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Director of Commercial Development and Investment, will present the report on the post-COVID economic recovery plan now.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and good morning, everybody. As you'll know, we submitted a economic recovery plan right at the start of this week, and you received a copy of that plan. I have in front of me notes for a presentation of about 10 minutes. In 4 parts, if that's okay. So I'm planning to give you an update on the context of the economic recovery plan, on the engagement we undertook in the preparation and drafting of the plan, on the drafting of the document itself and the themes contained within the document, and then finally on the use of the plan. So if I start off it's quite broad ranging, the economic plan, and it goes into it necessarily goes into detail about the nature of our city region economy and then the nature of our relationship with government. So I'll start off, but I'm sure that you'll have plenty of questions along the way, so I'll be ready for those as well, if that's okay. So the context then is absolutely key for the economic recovery plan. And there are two sides to it. There's the economic context and then there's the government context. Now, the economic context, we all know, because we've all discussed it and read the newspapers, that the situation we find ourselves is unprecedented. But unprecedented doesn't really help us. We as a combined authority with our partners in the local authorities needed quickly to move beyond that and to think about the specific impact on our city region. So we knew, for example, that in the first couple of months of the pandemic, we had probably received £2 billion worth of government support, be it through the grant scheme, through our local authorities, through the furlough scheme, through the bounce back loans to small and medium-sized enterprises and the other loan programs for companies, through the help for the self-employed, and some of the top-ups to our local authorities, which were, which we have received, but which are woefully inadequate. So we knew that there was lots of money coming into the city region, but we knew as well that despite that money coming in, we were having to prepare ourselves for a real economic rupture. And for us, the way we framed the discussion with on the economy was to say that our city region economy in the last 10 years had progressed a lot. So we had a lot to defend. For example, in the last 10 years, we'd dropped our unemployment rate from some 5% above the national average to below the national average. We had developed a whole new, well, we expanded the visitor and cultural economy so that it now accounts for £5 or £6 billion a year in our city and city region and employs almost 60,000 people. We developed real skills in, real strengths in advanced manufacturing, in material science and infectious diseases control. So the things that we're very, very good at nationally and internationally, we developed. And so we went into the pandemic having gained a lot in the last 10 years and having lots to defend. Our economic analysis also highlighted to us sectors that were particularly at risk under the pandemic, and I'll give you two examples for the time being. The first, of course, is the visitor economy. So if we're the fourth most visited tourist destination in the country, but tourists aren't allowed to travel, then our hotels, our museums, our restaurants, etc., are all vulnerable and need plenty of government support, so local plus lots of government support in order to survive for what is still an unknown period. So our visitor economy is one of the sectors we're concerned about. And the second one, of course, is automotive. So as people have locked down, they've not had any need to buy new cars, and so new car sales have declined significantly, and automotive was already challenged by the Brexit vote and by headwinds in the global economy. So two of the things that our city region economy is known for and good at and creates jobs through have been particularly challenged by by COVID. And so for us, what we're saying with that is quite simple. We have lots to defend, but also more to contribute, because if you look at the local industrial strategy that we finally finished in March 2020, right before the lockdown, you can see that as a place, as a city region, as a people, we've got lots more to contribute to the UK. And we have these long-term plans through the local industrial strategy that we still think are valid, but that clearly have been interrupted by COVID. And then beyond all of that, a concern for people. So before COVID, we knew that our economy was doing very well, but that we have this group of about 70,000 people who are not participating in the benefits of economic growth, who for reasons that are often to do with their own health or looking after somebody else who's not well, are not in the job market. And potentially COVID will make things more challenging for them because they'll be further away from a job afterwards than they were before. That's the first part of the context. The second part of the context is the government context. So what we've not been able to do, well, one of the challenges we've had in drafting an economic recovery plan is trying to understand what government wanted to do. Because the cost, that 2 billion that I mentioned right at the start, is so high to our city region economy, we knew that as local authorities, as a combined authority, as a local public sector, we couldn't do everything to secure and respond to the COVID pandemic, to secure our economy and respond to the government pandemic. We need wholesale, comprehensive government support, as does the rest of the nation. And so in the drafting of the recovery plan, we've constantly had to have regard for what the government might be doing, because typically it's announced measures without any warning. You know, there was no pre-announcement of the bounce back loan scheme, for example. There's been not really any pre-announcement of Homes England money going into brownfield sites, as another example. And we've always had to have an eye on what government might do next. And really, with Steve's leadership, we've been able to concentrate on what does our economy need, not just what we can get, what we think government might be after, but what does our economy really need in order to sustain itself in the short term, recover in the medium term, and thrive in the long term. And that goes back to the local industrial strategy and Steve's own commitment to using evidence to create policy. And that's helped us be very clear about the purpose and use of the recovery plan. So that's the context. Just summing up the context, it's the economy on the one hand, and then government's reaction to the economy on the other. And for us as a city region, needing to create a plan that responds to the economy, but also has in mind what the government might want to do. Secondly, then, on engagement. So the plan that you've received is the product of, I think we say 300 specific pieces of engagement across our city region and with national partners. And I'm just going to go through quickly the types of engagement that we've undergone in order to draft the plan. The first is the Metro Mayor's own grouping. So right from the start of the pandemic, the Metro Mayor brought together 4 groups to help inform what was happening on the ground. The first was of businesses directly, so a cross-section across the geography and size and type of business, of businesses that could inform Steve of the impact of the pandemic on him. And he held those meetings every week and then every 2 weeks initially. Second is the business networks, so the LEP, the Chambers of Commerce, the Women's Organisation, CBI, Federation of Small Businesses, those kind of business networks that are able to represent the views of hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses. And again, they made their representations, so they provided feedback to Steve and the recovery group. The third group that Steve convened is the community and voluntary sector and the trade unions, again meeting weekly and then 2 weekly. And the fourth group that we convened, that was maintained mainly by officers, was banks and commercial lenders. I think taking the lessons from the last financial crisis and from previous recessions is understanding that the way that the banks react to this will be key to the ability of businesses to carry on in business, to recover and then to grow again, because they'll need finance to do it and they'll need a good relationship with their bank. So we are still in very regular contact with the city regions banking community in order to understand what they're thinking and what the impact is on them. So that's the first grouping. We engage through the mayor's groups. Secondly, we engage through a group that I myself chair, which is called the Growth Directors Group. Previously, the Regen Directors or Regeneration Directors. So that's the Senior Growth Director from each of our local authorities, plus the LET, as well as myself, and then the Director for Strategic Commissioning and Policy from the Combined Authority. And we've met that group. It's a really positive group, and we meet every week. And we've met every week for, well, since the start of the pandemic, to start shaping what's happening on the ground, how we might respond, and what our priorities should be. And that Growth Directors Group is also a great conduit into our local authorities, so be it into housing, be it into the policy team, be it into the transport teams of the local authorities. It's a good way for us to understand what's going on and to have engaged discussion. The third way of engaging is that we've had engagement directly with key stakeholders. So I'm thinking here of the LET board. I'm thinking of the Manufacturing Technology Centre, for example, which is a key stakeholder in one of the projects that we have in the recovery plan, of the universities and colleges, in the community and voluntary sector. So where, either because it's a key stakeholder or because we share a project or for other reasons, we've also reached out individually to stakeholders to understand their position on the pandemic and how we might recover. And I hope you'll see that in the recovery plan there's a breadth of views represented there. Beyond that, we've also spoken to government. So government has actually been quite clear that it does not yet have an approach to recovery. It doesn't have a formal strategy for recovery, but we've been able to have discussions with individual civil servants, in my case, and in Steve's case, he's been talking to ministers through the M9 group, including the Prime Minister, including Rishi Sunak, so the most senior ministers, to try and get a view on their emerging thinking on recovery. And we have tried to reflect some of that emerging thinking, their emerging thinking on recovery, into some of the programs and projects that we present in order to maximise our chances of funding, of course. And the final thing I'll say on engagement is that we link to, so through our recovery, so government has asked Steve as Metro Mayor to lead on economic recovery, but we still provide a formal feedback mechanism into the Merseyside Resilience Forum's recovery cell. And I do that personally on a Wednesday at noon, actually. So there's a link between the Statutory Resilience Forum and the economic recovery work. That's it on engagement. I'll go on now and talk a little bit about the drafting of the document and its content. So fundamentally, we have 4 key recovery themes. The first is around the business ecosystem. The second is about a people-focused recovery. The third is about place. And the fourth is about a green recovery. And just in terms of technicalities, for the purpose of drafting, we had a core combined authority group responsible for drafting and nominated a lead person for each of those 4 themes. And the lead person for each of those 4 themes interacted not only with the core drafting group, but also with our key stakeholders. So with our local authorities in particular, but also with the private sector in terms of projects and programs and potential options for recovery. So just by way of example, in the place group, Raphael Miller from the investment team led that theme, and he worked with Sophie Bevan, who's also in the Combined Authority investment team, to work with all of our local authorities to pick out projects that could go on and be delivered within the next 3 years. What we decided to do is be very focused actually in the recovery plan on projects that could start within 12 months and start producing outputs within 3 years, because that's the build, the recovery mantra that we expect to see coming back from government. And so what we've included, we expect to find a certain degree of favour when the government's own recovery plan does come out. I'll give you a whistle-stop tour, if that's okay, of each of the themes, so that you understand the thinking as a whole of the recovery plan. So the first theme is the business ecosystem, and there's 2 points to it. The first point is that almost no matter where you started as a business in March, 98 maybe % of businesses are going to come out of this lockdown with less money than they went into with. Because even if you've benefited from the furlough scheme, even if you've received a bounce back loan, even if you've deferred your VAT and your tax and etc., you probably still have less money than you had. And so somehow government nationally, with our support, is going to need to find a way to recapitalise businesses and get them operating and growing again in the way they were before the pandemic. And so a large part of the business ecosystem theme is highlighting to government that we need a national solution to helping businesses return to a growth trajectory. Beneath that, however, we've got a particular Liverpool City region challenge, which is that in comparison with other places, our business ecosystem, so the context of our businesses, is not as good as other places at launching and growing new companies. So scale up businesses, as it's known technically. And there are various reasons for that. We're some about funding, some about business support, some about the perception of the place. But what we think is that in the recovery phase, we're going to need all the help we can get from new growing businesses that are able to employ our residents. And so we need a concerted effort on the business ecosystem and the conditions around growing businesses in order to help those businesses exist and thrive. And underpinning all of that is a series of projects that will help our business ecosystem. So we include the National Packaging Innovation Centre, Health Innovation Liverpool, Glass Futures, the Littlewoods Project, all physical places that will support high quality, decent jobs, so knowledge intensive, decent jobs in the future. So much for the business ecosystem. After that, we come on to the people-focused recovery, because we don't believe that you can just build your way out of this. And certainly with Steve's commitment to training and apprenticeships on young people, the focus on people is absolutely right economically as well. If people lose their jobs in retail or hospitality, and those jobs aren't replaced in retail or hospitality, they're going to need to do something else. And so coming out of this pandemic, probably we're going to need a large-scale retraining plan. We're going to need to help people who are made redundant to retrain and to return to work as quickly as possible. That's the number one thing we can do, because the longer you're not working, the less likely you are to work again. And so we're really, really focused on projects and programs and initiatives that will help people get back into work, get back into the habit of work, retrain for something new as quickly as possible. And I think that's absolutely right. It's the right thinking for our labour market and for our city region. The third is place. Now, beneath the pandemic, if you can remember back before the pandemic, we were talking a lot about towns, weren't we? The government had its towns fund, and we were thinking about Birkenhead and Southport and Bootle and Huyton and Kirkby, Runcorn, St Helens. And the programme there was about rebuilding towns for the 21st century. That hasn't gone away in any respect. So the towns agenda has not gone away in any respect. In fact, after the pandemic, it will be all the more critical to help towns back in, to help revive towns, because they are likely to lose more of their retail than other places. So that's the first part of the place agenda. And the second part of the place agenda is that the city centre has driven our cultural renaissance. But if the city centre is subject to ongoing and periodic lockdowns, and so the UK's most exciting city is what we call ourselves. But if we can't use the city centre to create that excitement, then we're going to need particular efforts on the city centre, on the hospitality, on the culture, on the leisure industries in the city centre. And so our place agenda has come right back to the city centre. On the one hand, it's the towns, but on the other, it's also the city centre and the particular package of measures we need to secure that. So that's the place agenda, and the final one is a green recovery. And we really keep that very simple. There's only 3 things in the green recovery, but each of them could be nationally important. The first is tidal. So developing a large-scale transformational tidal project is part of a long-term plan, not only for carbon neutrality or net carbon neutrality, but also for economic recovery. The second is housing retrofit. So using the crisis both to employ people and to improve the housing quality. And the third is the hydrogen agenda. Now, the hydrogen agenda links in large part to the tidal scheme, but also to the industrial base, particularly around Runcorn and Halton, and again gives it an opportunity to invest in clean growth as part of a recovery plan. So just recap that section. So in the drafting of this document, we had a core group of the combined authority. We had a named lead for each of the four themes, and they worked with our local authorities, with our businesses, with our third sector organisations to put together the projects and programmes and initiatives that you see within each of those themes. And I've just gone through in brief the content of each of those themes as well. So finally, we get to the use of the document, and this is an interesting one. We think there are 2 uses to this document. The first, clearly, is in discussion with government. So it's a document that states clearly what we need and what we can contribute should government fund elements of our recovery plan. I wouldn't expect them to fund the whole thing, but I expect the document to become the basis of a robust discussion with government about the part we can play in recovery as a city region, as an economy. The second use of it is a plan for ourselves, so that within our city region, amongst key stakeholders and our residents, we can be clear about what we think our best path to recovery is and how we should go about it. So there's one use heading down to government and using the document with government, but there's a second use right here in the city region, organising our local stakeholders. And clearly, it's got to be a living document, hasn't it? Because the pandemic will change, government's response will change, our own situation will change. I'm sure some of you have seen today that, or seen in the past couple of days, that Treasury is now asking for consultation on the comprehensive spending review, and we've got until mid-September, late September, to provide a response to the comprehensive spending review. And whilst that won't be the recovery plan, we'll have to do something broader than that. The recovery plan will clearly inform it. So that's it. It's a document that we have submitted that is about protecting the gains we've made and getting ready to contribute more, that we've developed in partnership and frankly can only deliver in partnership. And I'm really happy to take questions on that basis. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was muted. And thanks, Mark. I've got a few questions lined up. So Councillor O'Brien, then Councillor Long, and then Councillor Pugh.
Thank you, Chair. I really wanted to welcome that report, Mark. It was very long, but it was also extremely interesting and excellent, in my opinion. But I had a particular question, being chair of Liverpool's planning committee. We're very keen to grant permissions for reuse of the retail areas in our city centres. Those ones seem to have gone through fairly easily, but where we're having any conflict between historical areas, green spaces and demands for tourism and visitor attractions, we're running into a great deal of opposition. And I wondered whether the LCRCA might in the future think about developing some kind of policy about the benefits and trade-offs. You know, personally, I think we need to have a good way of resolving the issues. We need to be able to protect our heritage, it's important, but we also need to be able to revive our economic activity, our culture and tourism after this terrible pandemic. I wondered if you had any comment on that.
Only to say you must be right. I don't have any particular expertise in planning. I know the government is planning its own, well, the government is preparing its own planning review, isn't it? I've no personal comment, but the...
And I doubt it'll help us.
Well, yeah, that's quite another question. Quite another question, but no, I don't think in the time available a new combined authority policy will make that much of a difference. You know, recovery has started already and needs to be funded very, very quickly. So as a rule, we're focused less on new policy now and more on projects and programs. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Thank you for answering.
Can I just, before the next question comes in, can I also just make clear that the Metro Mayor has joined? Steve, I'm not sure if I'm informed that you've joined.
I am, Mark. I'm here. I've been here for quite a large chunk of your presentation.
Great. I won't repeat anything though. So I don't know, Chair, if that gives a different complexion to the questions, because clearly Steve will be able to provide his own thoughts and possibly answer questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Steve. Thanks for joining us. We do have a few questions. So I don't know if you both want to sort of stay with your cameras on and between the two of you could maybe get the best answer, if that's all right with both of you. Great. So we've got Councillor Long next, please. Councillor Derek Long, do you still want to talk?
Sorry, the mute went back off there.
Okay.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Mark. Nice to see you both. Yesterday, Mark, you made reference to comprehensive spending review. Yesterday, we got an inkling that it is going to turn towards expenditure constraint and reduction. The Chancellor seems to have abandoned the commitment to a 2.8% increase in the resource allocation for public expenditure, which leaves me with a very strong feeling of fear about how that's going to play out across our economy. So I think that's a context which is of some great concern. I think we need to note that whilst we've been in the active spending moments for the last few months, that actually retrenchment is going to come, and we need to prepare for that. So we need to think in those terms. The government will not be funding so much of this as we might hope. So that's a bit of a context. Brief observation, Mark, it would be helpful if there was an executive summary both for the stakeholders and government. This is a very long document. I understand why, but I think that would be very helpful. Just two observations about the way the city region economy works. The first one is that essentially the city region is a combination of economies, and I think one of the areas that I would appreciate some consideration for is the fact that different aspects of each economy is dependent upon anchor industries and anchor activities. And so in St Helens, Pilks, glass manufacturing, Saints are important components of our economy. And whilst I note the glass futures contribution, I also note with some frustration that when I was leader, I was expecting, or I was told that was going to take place within July of last year. So the government's clearly lost the plot a little bit in terms of that. But in terms of Pilks and Saints and other things in St Helens and all the other anchors for the other city region economies, what measures are you going to take to support those anchor industries to make sure that they go forward, because they're pre-existing and major, and if one of them falls over, I'm not suggesting other them would do, but if one of those anchor industries and one of the city region's economy runs into particular difficulties, aviation was a good example recently, we need to be clear that the city region can support that. And the second point is, what measures are you incorporating to monitor the differential impacts across this patchwork of economies to make sure all of the boroughs are actually keeping up in what is going to be a very difficult recovery?
Thanks, Derek, and nice to see you. Steve, would you like to go first on that one? I've got answers to both, but I suspect yours might be better.
Yeah, if it's okay, Chair, if I just jump back to Councillor O'Brien's question on planning, which is still and will remain a local authority issue, and therefore our ability to intervene at a local level is somewhat restricted, although next week I think we're going to be announcing our progress on what's called a spatial development strategy, which is different, and Derek Long will know about this as somebody who had it formerly in his portfolio. But it's taken a long time to develop this because we saw what happened in Greater Manchester when local plans were sort of brought together, and that caused one or two issues. So we are pushing ahead with the SDS. We're the only area outside of London that has certain powers in respect of future planning, but it won't be about the minutiae and about individual needs of local authorities. That quite rightly still sits with councils. Derek, you're right. The mood music we're getting from central government is that there will be a retraction of the state, of the support that we've seen. For instance, public transport, we've seen the need, haven't we, for government to intervene to actually save a system where the commercial model is now not fit for purpose, something that myself and my party have long been campaigning about. I know that you support that, but it's just demonstrated all of those inadequacies of a market model in regards to public transport. It doesn't work. We have to over-subsidise for those routes that aren't commercially viable, and then the others are cherry-picked, and that can't be sensible. But it in no way stops us from pushing ahead with our plans locally. On the sectoral support from the combined authority, that needs to link, doesn't it, to what we're going to do geographically, but also in response to what comes from national government. And we saw the sort of fiscal event with Rishi Sunak the other day. Actually, there are some crumbs in lots of these things that we then go and pursue with vigour. So, for instance, there is some hope that there will be a continuation of large-scale infrastructure investment, and I guess what we've been developing some large-scale projects in the government's terminology that are oven ready. So we're starting to look at what they want to buy and then tailoring what it is that we are asking government to work in partnership to deliver locally. And the other point that you make about it has to be more than just concrete and steel. I think you're spot on. We need to align what happens with that infrastructure investment to our skills strategy, and that's exactly why central government cannot do this. A command and control system doesn't work when locally we're going to have to take decisions, and that will have a knock-on effect to the sorts of sectors that we want to pursue in the future, or certainly that we will look to provide some of our very short and meagre financial support to, because you can imagine the calls on us at the moment. If the government was to give me £2 billion tomorrow, it wouldn't go far enough. So we have to tailor it. But you're spot on about the differentials. We need to monitor that. So that's why, in regards to skills, we're doing that, but also economic impact. Mark will probably tell you some of the things that we've been doing with the directors of growth in each of the 6 local authority areas to monitor that. And then just on a last thing, the stuff about glass futures, you're spot on. We're looking for initiatives and funding opportunities that put us in a competitive advantage to other areas. So it's no good mimicking and copying what other areas are doing. We're looking at what it is that we can do where there might well be government funding that follows it. And glass futures is exactly it. You kicked it off 18 months or more ago, and it's taken a long time to get to where we are. But there was an announcement of a considerable sum of money that was going towards that project. We're already working up plans ourselves on how we can further support it. Hydrogen has become a huge thing because climate emergency didn't go away pre-COVID, and we want to ensure that in a post-COVID world that we continue some of the progress that we made. So hopefully all of that gives you some confidence that we are trying desperately to do what we can do locally with the powers and resource that we get from central government.
Councillor Long, I'll just follow up in brief on your 2 specific points. So in terms of anchor institutions, in your case, Hilton Saints, for example, we are aware of this and paying attention to it, right? So necessarily this is a joint endeavour between the local authority itself that has the first relationship with the anchor institution and then the combined authority. But in a couple of instances, I'll give you non-St Helens examples. We're working with National Museums Liverpool employs thousands of people in Liverpool city centre, and we're of course working with them to engage with DCMS on what the emergence and the emergence from lockdown and their financial needs are after. So where we have an opportunity to engage directly with the company, with government, that's what we do. And we're doing that with a couple of other large employers around the city region as well. And then on the patchwork of local economies, you must be right again. What we're often doing is providing a city region view and then sending a local view based on the same evidence directly to the local authority. So St Helens, for example, have received the breakdown of impact on St Helens that we describe across the city region in the recovery plan. And then work with, in this case, Lisa Harris, who's St Helens Growth Director, to help formulate her own local economic recovery plan.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for that. I think, as I say, monitoring from Steve, very much appreciated. Lack of resources, very much understood, and just keeping an eye on the anchors, excuse me, very helpful. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Long. Councillor Pugh.
Yeah, it's a huge plan, and there's big numbers in it, and I congratulate the authors of it on both their ambition and their sensitivity to current circumstances. What I'm really interested in is our role as an Overview and Scrutiny Committee in this, because our job is primarily to scrutinise the actions of the city region and the mayor, and we want those obviously to be as transparent as possible. The document includes, though, a raft of proposals. Some are, quite frankly, private proposals, like apropos Everton Football Club, for which thankfully none of us bear direct responsibility. Some are hybrid, some are local authority schemes that are not necessarily involving the LCR, some are just simple requests for government to fund something, and some are more complex grant and partnership and joint funding arrangements. I think it would have been helpful, Mark, if we could sometime have a sort of breakdown of the elements of this in terms of what are the commitments specifically that the city region would be entering into were this plan to be accepted, so that we can look and scrutinise them. Because there's quite a difference in some of the proposals being made. For example, some of the proposals create jobs for the cost of about £9,000 per job. Some other proposals create jobs for the cost of something like £14,000 a job. So there's really some important work of scrutiny to be done here in looking at our role in this, quite apart from what the government's role might be. So that's the first point about transparency. And I do think it does matter, but locally and regionally. I mean, I looked at one proposal in this to give, I think, what seemed on the face of it when I first read it. We were proposing to give £50 million to Southport Pleasureland, which is nice, but I guess our friends in New Brighton would have a different take on it. And when I looked further into it and analysed it, it turns out we're not giving anything at all. We're actually, as a local LCR, we're asking the government for 10 million, and private finance is going to be a raise of 40 million. So it is, in a sense, a proposal which, whether it happens or not, is not going to fundamentally depend on us. So a table at the end just showing what specifically the city region is going to spend money on, or thinks money should be spent on, think its own money should be spent on, would be extremely helpful. And obviously opposite that, the partnership funding they'll be requiring from the government as well. The second point is not about transparency, about timescale. It's because it's such a very big document. We mixed into this two types of requests. One for immediate and urgent help with things that are very, very pressing. Steve just mentioned the transport system. I imagine there's a collapse in transport revenues at the moment within the city region, which is hitting us very badly. And that's something that can't be addressed in 4 or 5 years' time. And we don't want, a capital grant 10 years in the future in order to address that. But you're also mentioning in the same document, without really teasing out and differentiating the difference between the two, things like the tidal barrage, which isn't necessarily a reaction to the COVID situation at all, but is something desirable that could be done. And I wonder, by not simply differentiating closely enough, we're actually going to confuse civil servants who are ready to be confused on this in the first place, and therefore create a cause for delay in terms of securing some of the more urgent funding we need for the more urgent priorities. And the last thing, forgive me, Mark, if I didn't pick this up in the document, but there doesn't seem a great deal said in the document about changes in pattern of working, because one of the big COVID changes, and we're witnessing ourselves through our, the fact that we're not all down in Man Island, is that people are working and operating from home. And that must have roll-on implications for city centre office development and the like. And forgive me if it's in the document, a very long document, and I tried to read all of it if I missed that, but it is something I think we need to address.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm sure that the Mayor will have his own views before mine.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. John, on the KPIs, you're right. Unfortunately, and you'll know this the same as me from our days in Parliament, the way in which we are measured is through Treasury and through Green Book. And so whilst you're right, on some things it will say, you know, X amount per £1,000 on jobs, that's not the only measure. There are a whole host of different things that also build in whether the benefit cost ratio in that business case is high enough for us to support it. But you're spot on. What we could do, we could draw out sort of the financial aspects of what the potential liabilities for the combined authority would be, and we can do a table on that. I've just created more work for Mark and his team, who've been working unbelievable hours to try and get this recovery plan. But I think it's important, if the scrutiny committee asks for these things, that we do provide it, because you're spot on. That's the idea of scrutiny, and that's why I've not missed one. I think this is the most important committee of all within the combined authority, and I keep on saying that the role that councillors, that you all play in what we're trying to achieve, is fundamental, because we need to convince government that we've got all of our houses in order so that we can get those extra pots of money. And just on the knock-on effect, of course, the way that we're working now, a virtual meeting, it's not just on the likes of developments in the city centre and grade A office space and all that sort of thing, John. It's simple things like connectivity. Certain people are finding it difficult through BT Openreach or whatever to get connected to the internet. We have really ambitious plans for connectivity in the city region that I'm sure Mark will pick up on. And of course, even the way through blended learning that our children are going to be taught in the future is important to try and get that connectivity issue right. And that's why both the digital inclusion / exclusion agenda, and of course the costs and access to the equipment are really important as well. And we're trying to look to see whether we can work with organisations to tackle that issue as well. But to the world of work, we all better get used to this sort of thing. And I've been speaking with unions, because simple things like ergonomics, I wonder how many of us are sitting on a dining room chair now and not on a designed computer chair, for instance. And we might not just be storing up some physical issues that we'll all have with our health, but of course we don't know yet the full impact of the mental health and well-being issues on being isolated. So there's a whole host of different things that we are monitoring. But I thank John for the questions.
Thank you. Can I respond in brief? So on your first point, Councillor Pugh, you're right. So luckily we already have that table, so that'll be no extra work to share. What I would just underline is that it's a submission, not an approval. So each of the projects will need to go through the same scrutiny that SIF projects or combined authority projects go through from this point on. So we're not saying by being included in this plan, everything's agreed, just get on with it, because clearly there's a process to go through to receive funding and then to allocate funding onto projects. I don't think any of us, well, possibly in our wildest dreams, but not in our less wild dreams, think that the government is going to fund every single intervention in this scheme, in this plan. And so there'll be a further process to go through, and that will be that's available for scrutiny as well. The second point you made on public sector needs in the transport system, or indeed the £250 million hole in our local authorities' finances over the next couple of years. You must be right. What we were warned off from in this plan, though, was to bundle in what the public sector needs in order to perform its basic duties with what the economic recovery plan is. So the public sector needs, particularly of our local authorities, also of our transport network, are subject to parallel but different discussions led by Steve. So we've made different representations to government about them. And the economic plan is more about the projects and programs that you see and have reviewed, rather than simply asking government to do the decent thing and fund public services. But that discussion's already going on. On working patterns, interesting point. I think we took the view that there will be changes. We don't understand the extent of them yet, so we're not going to try and preempt them. Lots of the plan is perfectly capable, well, practically all of the plan is capable of proceeding without full knowledge of how working patterns will change in offices. Not everyone works in an office, not everyone will rely on an office, but we didn't want to try and be futurologists. We wanted to present an investable plan, if that makes sense.
Just coming back very quickly, and thanks both Steve and Mark for those answers. I just basically think there's a distinction between what we need and what we desperately need, and if we lump the two in a way that isn't quite differentiated and clear to government, I think they might give us the wrong things rather than the right things, if I can put in that order. I think that you understand the point, and I think you probably accept the point. If you have sort of 50 suggestions put to government, and it's left to them entirely what they opt for first, we may not get the best solution for the area in terms of the limited resources we may be allocated to us.
You must be right. It's a careful balance for those of us led by Steve who are engaging with ministers.
The great thing is, John, that this is not in isolation. It's a document, and I keep on saying to people, for instance, Mark and his team have literally toiled over the midnight oil to try and get the words on the page, so that when they're received by government in government speak and appropriate, and they hit all the right buttons and all that. Actually, alongside this, there's a whole piece of work going on, which is myself and lots of others about government relations. And again, John, I'm not just saying this because you're a councillor now. You know, because of your previous role in national politics, that it's not just about words on paper. It is about relationships. It is about ensuring that you get to the right level in government, and that's really where my role comes in, and others within the organisation. And believe me, when you get time with Rishi Sunak, you don't waste a second of it, because you know that if you hit the right notes, there's every chance that you can get pots of money. And we've been particularly successful recently in attracting some national infrastructure pots to the Liverpool City region. But you're right, I understand what you're saying. Most people reading that document, it seems to be saying one thing, it seems to be saying a lot of things. Behind that, we're focusing down on what the priorities are.
Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Sam Marshall, please.
Hi, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Just to say, a great report, the Bill Back Better. It was quite lengthy. I did see through all of it, though. I've just noticed this morning there was 1.4 billion in the total plan for the for the whole lot of it. And the green recovery itself was 285 million. And it's just a point to note really that the government have offered 350 million today nationally. So it is a big ask. It was great to see. We've seen a lot of the projects mentioned, I think, either at Liverpool City Region Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny already, or at our own local councils as well. And it was just great to see the whole areas combined in one place. Certainly a lot of work gone into it, so well done to everyone. And there's certainly a lot of will to be bold and ambitious across a number of things. Just to pick up, Steve, you spoke about mental health and well-being following COVID. And I think Mark mentioned earlier, we've got 70,000 people that we knew of before that who were not participating in the economy. Obviously, that number is going to ramp up quite significantly 1st of August and then again, obviously, the 1st of November. And I think it is just a focus on the social value. And it's possibly for a separate overview and scrutiny meeting as the projects come through. But I'm just wondering if there's a global approach to asking companies that are involved in bidding or being partners what it is they've done during COVID to protect the workers' terms and conditions and to protect people's jobs. There's a significant amount of money, wherever we get it from and however much we do get, to be ploughed back in. We want to really make sure that it's going to companies that have kept a good moral tone throughout all of this, if you like. I know we talked briefly about funding streams, and I know they're going to be tricky and multiple. And I think Councillor Howard actually brought it up at either the LEP or the local industrial strategy task and finish groups that we were on, to see if we could have that as a separate breakout topic. As I say, it may be for the work plan for next year. But it was great to see, obviously, the social value and the people focus right up there as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Marshall. We actually lead in the whole country as a combined authority on socially trading organisations, community wealth building, and that whole social agenda. And hopefully, early next year, we will be either first or one of the first to have a fair employment charter. And that's really where what you're saying will link in, because a lot of the future funding that we will get, we will be asking organisations, businesses, large and small, to sign up to the Fair Employment Charter. And within that, there will be a number of stipulations. If you want some of our funding, then you have to play by the rules, and them's the rules. You're right, if you look sort of in this period where government support has been there, probably a lot of businesses will be able to demonstrate that they've kept people on. But if you're having people who are being paid by national government, that's the easy bit. I think it's the post-furlough deadlines, as you've identified, that they're the scary ones for me. They will be milestones, not just for individual companies, but for us. We've already seen universal credit at record levels, and that's only going to go one way, isn't it? So what can we do? And I think what you've sort of identified there is our approach. We should be looking to support businesses who support their workforces. And that's the idea behind having a social agenda. That's literally the golden thread through all of the documentation, including the investment strategy that we, well, probably 18 months, 2 years ago or more, that we got through the combined authority. So it all does start to, it's a jigsaw and there's bits everywhere, but it all starts to come together.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Anything to add there, Mark?
Yeah, just briefly, if that's okay. Thanks, Councillor Marshall, for the comments. Just to add to what Steve said, absolutely right, linking funding to behaviour. And you'll see that strongly when the updated investment strategy emerges very shortly. And the second is just a mention for Kath O'Dwyer, the new chief exec of St Helens, because she's been very focused on mental health in the workplace and making businesses' contribution to the recovery, rather than the lockdown, their contribution to the recovery, more positive engagement about well-being in the workplace. And so we as a combined authority are working with Kath to see how we can make that part of almost like, you know, the business's deal. You know, you support this bit as we take care of other things. So thank you.
That's really good. Thank you. Keep an eye on St Helens and Catherine. Thanks.
Councillor Tricia O'Brien.
Yes, thanks for letting me come back in. I wanted to follow up on what Steve had to say about planning. Of course, Steve's quite right for saying that decisions rest at the moment with local planning authorities. But the thing I wanted to highlight about this is that, as we know, we're all interrelated in this Liverpool City region. So anything that's boosting the culture and tourism of Liverpool will, by default, help in St Helens Knowsley, because we've talked about on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee the fact that we want people to come here for the whole tourist offer, not stay in one place but to move about. And since we've already had it mentioned that we're the third most important area in the country, we could definitely build on that. But my point about planning is the planning is interrelated. We've already had mentioned in the report about the cruise terminal, and we've had it brought up about Bramley Moor. I think that anything that is in the best interest of the whole local combined authority, maybe we should have some support from them in local planning decisions. Although they're locally made, we do consult extensively with umbrella organisations and national organisations when we're making our local decisions. And I think better decisions get made when we have a feed-in from them. That is why I suggested that we might be able to do more in the LCR if we had some policy documents around these. But maybe that isn't possible. You've said that we need action now. I agree, we need action now. It seems to me the revitalisation that we require is going to have to come from mostly the private sector. So I think we need to support private sector planning initiatives as an LCR myself. And I'd like to start exploring ways that we might be able to do that. I haven't got a magic wand about it, but I do think, like, if we want Bramley Moor to go through, there are other things that are going to affect the historic docks area, because it's the whole waterfront vision that we need the LCR CA to come in and say, look at the figures. I thought the figures in this report were fantastic, Mark, having all that before us. I'm going to try and use them in my arguments. But, you know, it's not always easy to access this, and you have got the superior knowledge about just what a big impression some of this private development can make to the whole area.
Yeah, I understand, Councillor O'Brien, exactly what you're saying. I'm just giving you the reality of the sensitivities around these issues, and that is that if it comes organically bottom up, then of course we could do it. We could do it as soon as we got agreement through the combined authority when we have a next cycle. But it's where it starts, and so if through your group and through the council that was a proposal that came to the combined authority, it's something we could pick up very easily. The problem is that when the combined authority is seen to be starting these things and it looks almost like a land grab, that's where tensions start to rise. And at this moment in time, we've done really, really well because there haven't been any fallout at all, because we've been doing things where we all get agreement stage by stage, and I think that's the way it would have to continue.
I understand. I've only got to think about Liverpool Airport to understand where you're coming from.
Thanks, guys. Councillor Howard.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks to Mark and Steve for speaking to the report. I'm glad to hear that the separate initiatives in the report will be taken through the Committee for Individual Scrutiny, because personally I haven't had a chance to read all of the report just because it's 218 pages, and I know that's because it was finished this week. But yeah, the further scrutiny is definitely welcomed. My question is about the possibility of local lockdowns and what sort of contingency has been thought about for that. It's entirely likely that Liverpool or parts of the city region may be put into local lockdowns, as Leicester has and as parts of the northwest are potentially going to be in the coming days or weeks. Obviously, that would, the best laid plans would go to waste. And so I'm just wondering if there has been any broad contingency planning around, local lockdowns in the city region.
Okay, I'll pick those 2 points up. The first one is that any projects that might well get supported through the submission of this plan to national government would then have to come back to us. The business case would have to be drawn up, and then it would have to go through the same process as anything that goes to the combined authority, and that would include going through the scrutiny committee as well. The local lockdown issue is a complex and vexed one, in all honesty, because if you remember originally when it was muted, the 2 examples that were given by Hancock were Liverpool and Manchester for lockdowns. And so immediately myself and Andy Burnham asked questions of government, and that's why we held a joint press conference where we asked for access to local data, because we need to fully understand, and the government still haven't provided this, what the thresholds are for action. So, for instance, the one in Leicester was that there was a large number of increased transmissions and people with infections. That number went substantially up, hundreds. What happened when they muted that Wigan was going to be locked down? It went up by 300%, but it went up from something like none to 3 or whatever it was, which is a nonsense. So the figures were very small, but of course the overall percentage looked huge. So we wanted to know what the thresholds are, and the government still haven't provided us with clarification on that. On the data, however, myself and Andy argued that the government legally had to provide us with access to the data, including named data, not just postcode data, named data. And the reason that we wanted local authorities to have access to this is because then you can specifically target messaging. So if you have a look at what happened in the south of Liverpool and in parts of Knowsley, it was primarily young people, 16 to 24, where they'd seen increases in the infection rates, and therefore having a more generalised, you need to wash your hands and wear face coverings message was probably not appropriate. And of course, we can also call on organisations, for instance, our football clubs, they might want to help if it was a specific group of people, and that's why we wanted the data, and at long last that has been provided. It is for local authorities with their directors of public health to decide on the response to local lockdowns, working with government. Ours is more if it becomes a strategic issue and public transport, for instance, would be required not to stop in certain areas. That's where we get, I suppose, the huge call on our resources. But we also link into the Local Resilience Forum and the LRF. They're still monitoring the situation in regard to working with directors of public health.
Thanks, Steve.
Great, thanks. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to jump in and ask a question of my own, if that's all right. It's about sort of the impact that a border, we now know there'll be a border because of Brexit, and this will have a profound effect on the ports of Birkenhead and Liverpool. And the worry down south is of these large truck parks and these massive delays. Do you foresee anything like that here? And if so, what sort of contingencies have been put in place for that?
Okay, so this comes under the national emergency powers, and there are conversations that go on, but they are governments are doing that through the goodness of the heart rather than because they are absolutely forced to do it. But we've been campaigning for for a long time for some sort of additional infrastructure capacity for rail, certainly from the post-Panamax facility in Liverpool too. That's why, you know, Northern Powerhouse Rail and even connecting onto the HS2 line, high-speed line, when it comes as far as the Delta. That's why it's so important to us. We simply do not have the sort of space in the immediacy of those areas for huge numbers of lorries or HGVs. So it's looking like it will be out of the immediate area, which could mean pushing it into another one of the boroughs. And that's why it makes absolute sense about the strategic overview of a combined authority, so that local authorities can work with each other through the CA to determine where that would be best geographically. But I think the thing that you said was the most worrying is this thing about the artificial border. Yes, we're going to have something. Brexit really has been on the back burner, but people are starting, I think, to focus again on what it might mean. We are going to face significant difficulties and challenges because of COVID and in the post-COVID world with employment. And then on top of that, I think we are facing huge numbers of jobs that may well be threatened, which might be determined on the type of Brexit deal that goes through, certainly the type of trade deals that go through. And that's why I think people will start to wake up and realise that this wasn't the best decision for the country. It's certainly not the right decision for the Liverpool City region.
Thanks, Steve. If there are no more questions, I think we can move to recommend the report, actually. So the recommendations should be on your screen now. They're also on page 33 of the agenda, paragraph 2.1. So can we get approval of those recommendations, please, from the group?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Approved.
Agreed.
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 Brilliant. That's obviously passed. I'd like to thank Mark and
Chair,
Steve.
just a small point. I mean, one council's already said it already, apropos some of the schemes needing further scrutiny and so on. I mean, I hope what has happened isn't construed as wholesale support for absolutely everything in the report, regardless of what pitfalls may be in train. I think what we're doing is supporting it in principle is a really good idea. Am I correct in understanding that? As long as that's understood, I'm happy to go along. Yeah.
Chair, if it assists, we can minute to reflect that that's clear.
Thanks, Jill. Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. I would like to say thanks to Mark and to Steve for the report and for answering all our questions quite extensively. I'd just like to take the opportunity to say that every councillor and officer here has had to adapt considerably in an effort to best serve their constituents over the past few months, and the LCR has had to too. But many of its initiatives that have come through have managed to keep our region functioning really well. So I'd just like to thank everyone for that work. I feel like it's been really gritty work at times, but very necessary. And the region is stronger for all the councillors and all the officers efforts. So thank you for that, and thank you for attending today. If there's nothing further, I'm going to close the meeting.
Bye.
No,
Thanks,
great.
Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Well done. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chair.
Bye.